I'm a journalist, and so I get a little suspicious when every single panel is the moderator says, "My good friend so-and-so," because it does feel like you just got all your buddies in a room and had to. But it so happens they are my friends. I like having these conversations, and so. But it's also, I think, just so happens that maybe this is the way the world works. That the people you're friends with tend to think like you, and they tend to sort of, building the things that you get interested in. So, I am here with my good friend Marta Belcher, the CEO of the Filecoin Foundation, who we've worked together on a number of things, particularly in Davos. Guys, shh. Thank you. And Filecoin is one of the founding members of DAIS, has been with us for a number of months. So very, very pleased to have you part of what we're doing here. And let's just get people to understand why decentralized storage, which was, it's not what people think about as the sexiest part of AI necessarily, or the sexiest part of tech generally, but so fundamentally important to some of these principles that we're talking about in terms of ownership, control, immutability, and everything else. So tell us a bit about what Filecoin's all about, firstly, very quickly, but then just segue into that. Why does it matter?
Well, I think it's sexy. So
at least
for what it's worth. But I understand if you don't.
I do too. I'm just saying not everyone else does.
When you go to a website today, right, and you click on the website, you're getting that data from somewhere, right? It's stored somewhere in the world. And as it turns out, it's almost certainly only stored by one of three companies, Microsoft, Amazon, or Google. And so what we don't even necessarily realize is that we're all kind of living our lives through just a handful of corporations. And that means that we have no choice but to trust those corporations with our data, right? We have to trust that they will protect that data. When there are government requests, they'll protect it from hackers. We have to trust that they won't misuse it in ways we don't want. And we just have no choice. And that's because of this centralized nature of data storage and the web in general. So for Filecoin, what we're doing is trying to create an alternative to that, where people can be in control of their own data, and you don't have to live through just a handful of corporations. The way we do that, in very brief, is basically we use the fact that cryptocurrency allows you to program your money, and we create a network where people can rent out the extra storage space on their computer hardware, and other people can rent that space from them and store chopped up and encrypted versions of their files on other people's computers. And so for us, that is actually sort of kind of like Airbnb for file storage. And it sounds niche and unsexy, but I think it's a foundational layer to enabling you to be in control of your own data, which is foundational for sort of this next generation of the web. And the same principles are absolutely fundamental to AI, because if you think about something that requires so much compute, similar to data storage, right? Something that just requires this massive amount of hardware, the number of corporations that are going to be able to afford that, if you do it in a centralized way, is really just a handful. And so I think the question for us is, do we want to have just a few companies who really have the power of AI in their hands, or do we want to do it in a way that is decentralized, where we can take that compute, decentralize it in the same way we do for data storage with Filecoin, and actually have people be in control of their own AI the way they currently can be in control of their own data using Filecoin.
There you go. A wonderful summary of why this matters. I think one of the things that struck me when I wrote the book with Frank, our biggest fight, we looked at why these things like the sort of real economics of control of data centers has become this sort of bottleneck factor that just leads to the economics of all the other power, right? And one of the points that was made was that the internet needed a steady state. It needed us to know that at any given time, however many millions of people were logging onto one website, they'd be getting the exact same amount of information. And that therefore, at any given time, it was being updated. And you needed to control, to be able to deliver that reliably, if you're Facebook or whomever, you needed a massive amount of storage, of delivery, of computation. And it kind of since we didn't have a solution, it defaulted to these big data centers, all the economics, all the energy issues of that, and it just reinforced the control. How do you foresee this current moment in that regard, right? Because the first phase of this centralized approach to AI, the LLMs we're seeing, everybody's piling everything in these big data centers, running them there because it's the fastest way to build the LLMs. But there's this idea that we're going to get this bottleneck problem with that. We now have the capacity, thanks to Filecoin and others, of a steady state that can be delivered in a distributed way. And if we end up with this bottleneck where the internet's, everybody's pinging these LLMs from the center, we're not going to be able to handle it. And everything's going to have to push to the edge. This is like this part of this agentic movement right now. How do you guys fit into that? Where do you see the storage piece of the stack as we move to a more edge compute, decentralized way, just almost by the bane of the necessity almost of where the internet needs to go with AI?
I think you're exactly right that we're definitely at an inflection point with AI. I mean, I think that's very clear to everyone, right? That this is a moment where we kind of get to define what the future of AI looks like. It's really emerging. Everyone is getting into it, and there is this question of like, is it just going to go kind of what I think you're right is kind of almost the default route, like the route that kind of I think it would be the same route as the internet, right? Where you end up with just a handful of corporations that can actually afford this, or is it going to go a route where people can be in control of their own AI, right? Where they can, for example, we can have decentralized compute and have people be able to run their own AI systems. And I think, in terms of where decentralized storage fits into this and sort of why that's important, well, first of all, building these decentralized compute type platforms, there are things like, for example, the Bacalao project that's being built on top of Filecoin that basically takes the same concepts as Filecoin and applies that to compute. So that's one. The second is obviously the fuel of AI is data, right? So where is that data being stored? Who has control of that data? If you can delete a bunch of data, particular types of data from a training model, that model is going to come out very differently than if you can't. And so where is that data being stored? And so there's also like an element of, for example, with Filecoin, we have several companies that are building on top of Filecoin, things like SingularityNet, Bagel, and the current sort of capacity of Filecoin, you could train like Llama 45,000 times with the amount of data. So just having that massive amount of data, having a place to put it where people can actually be in control of it in a decentralized way is really important. And then the last thing I'll say of why decentralized storage is important is data has gravity. And so, when you're doing compute, you can't just send these massive data sets across the world, right? Constantly back and forth. When you're talking about that amount of data and training that amount of data, you want the compute to be able to be sort of close to the storage. And so that's another reason it's really important for AI.
So one of the things that people are talking about is this like close to the storage, close to like this idea of resolving the bottleneck challenges that will come from this is that it'll be our phones and our laptops and our TVs, whatever, all plugged into these mesh networks, presumably drawing on decentralized storage. So do you foresee, and what needs to happen for that capability to happen, where a Filecoin layer interfaces with just regular consumer level hardware that then becomes part of this kind of compute story?
Yeah, and that's the dream. It's all sort of being built. There are multiple projects building on top of Filecoin that have that vision. Bacalao is one that I mentioned that has the vision of that decentralized compute building on top of Filecoin, and that's the dream. And I think that's what a lot of the people actually in this room right now are thinking about and building.
Right. Every one of us, like participating in somehow in this machinery that drives it, and then contributing your data, being rewarded for it, owning it, controlling it. That's the vision here. So, Marta, you're actually a lawyer, and you've actually spent a lot of time delving into some of these core principles of liberty and rights as it comes to legal structures, and you've done a tremendous job with the EFF and others advising on this. Put that hat on now and take a look at the policy frameworks that are in place. Like there's the EU model, there's the Biden order, which presumably will be very different now. And they have this concentration about recognizing central power and central control over these AIs and then them being the regulated entities. what do you see? What needs to happen so that there can be an opportunity for decentralized compute and decentralized storage to thrive in this environment?
Well, specifically talking about AI, and regulation, I have what I think are, in some cases, somewhat unpopular opinions. But as a civil liberties advocate, there are two things that I'm really worried about when you start talking about AI and regulation. What I'm really worried about is there's a knee-jerk reaction to AI that leads people to, I think, become very afraid of what could happen as a result of AI, and as a result of that, start to sort of restrict, think restrictively in a way that is not really aligned with the civil liberties values that we've fought for a long time, and also that is, I think, very intellectual property maximalist in a way that makes me very uncomfortable. So I think there's a knee-jerk reaction that's like, oh, AI is out there and it's looking at and learning from a thing that I wrote or a thing that I created that's out there on the internet. That's not good. They should have to pay me to do that, right? And I think that the thing that folks really have to realize is, that is sort of fundamental to why we have a sort of free and open internet, is the idea that Google can go look at and read and learn from and index all of those things that are out there and then utilize it for something that allows us to navigate the web. And that sounds obvious to us now, but that's because we're taking for granted these very, very hard-fought precedents. And so when it comes to AI, I think it's really important that we don't sort of have that knee-jerk reaction, and we actually look at it as, look, if you have things out there, you want to be able for AI to look at something, read it, and learn it the same way a human could look at it and read it and learn it. And that's how we should be thinking about it, as opposed to this knee-jerk reaction of, well, I want to get paid.
So I think that's certainly the end goal, right? But I think one of the things that's a challenge here is precisely because of the power imbalance that we're all referring to, right? That there are these, so when you mention Google or you mention OpenAI, whatever these big LLMs, I think the resistance you're going to get from owners of copyright and so forth is like, look at how much value they have and they control, right? So I suppose just we've only got 1 minute left, how to just like square that story, because clearly that vision, that idealist vision that you just laid out is where we want to go. But how do we get there, given that there is just so much almost, patently unfair domination of those rights, of those IP rights in the hands of these massive entities?
Right. And so the answer to that is, who can pay licensing fees to all of the copyright owners in the world and, everyone who's ever created, anything that an AI is going to go out and read and learn from? OpenAI. Who can't? Decentralized developers and decentralized projects, like open source projects. They cannot. If you want an open and decentralized AI ecosystem, you don't want it in the hands of just a few corporations, you should not be advocating for any data set that AI is going to go out and learn from to be something that has to be paid.
Okay. Well, on that note, a round of applause for Marta Belcher. Thank you so much. Thank you.